wanted to welcome everybody to our meeting today in our brand new offices, and I've invited our Executive Director, Spencer Eccles, to tell us a little bit about the offices and give you all a welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you, Tara and Kelly and the whole team. This is a big deal for us. This is the inaugural flight of the room, utilizing all the technology that we spent literally 3 years working to get to this point. It's actually been a little bit longer, but let me just step back and give you a little background as to why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing as a whole in terms of the Governor's Office of Economic Development. To start with, about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a discussion about creating a building called the World Trade Center. When we went into the economic downturn, it really eliminated any possibility of thought about that happening. But when I started about 3 years ago now, or coming up on 3 years, after Governor Herbert appointed me, I recognized a couple things. First of all, Governor Herbert said in his inaugural address that unprecedented times demand unprecedented partnerships. And the way I've been raised, and I think kind of the culture of Utah really, and I think it's unique to Utah, and I'll touch on that here in a minute, and Dennis Likes will speak to that from SEIC as well in various forums. We have a very collaborative environment in Utah. So with us now being number one in business and careers for 2 years running on the Forbes ranking list, there's a reason why that has happened, and it's not just by accident. It's because we have a plan. Governor Herbert's let out, and we've developed a plan, and it also has to do with these unprecedented partnerships that Governor Herbert's talked about. And in our environment, we call it C squared plus E squared, and that's collaboration and coordination, increases our efficiency and effectiveness, and it leads us to greater success, which is really under Tara's leadership with this committee and your great volunteering, benevolent efforts, which we appreciate so much because things don't happen without pulling everybody together. We're able to move things forward. And so about 3 years ago, we started talking about the need to collaborate in a greater way with the World Trade Center and with the USTAR, or the Utah Science, Technology, and Research Initiative. And at the time, we didn't know that there was going to be a consolidation of the Office of Energy Development. But once that occurred, then we started talking about that. And then, of course, the Governor's Office of Economic Development. A number of things have spurred from that. One is the Governor's Economic Coordinating Council, which pulls 6 main economic development groups together and 4 at-large positions to really discuss economic issues and how do we coordinate and collaborate better. Rural Partnership Board, the Fund of Funds, USTAR, World Trade Center, GOET, and EDC Utah. Well, those thoughts 3 years ago really led to saying it would be better if we could co-locate these main entities. And at the time, we didn't have any options, but then one popped up. And we evaluated a couple of others, and we pushed on it. And so this location and the efforts to get here have really been long-term, but specifically much more in the last 3 years. Now that we're here, you have the Governor's Office of Economic Development, the USTAR program, the Office of Energy, and the World Trade Center all located on one floor and all collaborating, working together. In fact, this building will be rebranded as the World Trade Center at City Creek. And as you know, sitting here on State Street in the corner of South Temple and right in the heart of this $2 billion redevelopment, it's been a significant positive impact, both on morale as well as giving us the ability to bring ambassadors in, to have you here, and to have CEOs into our office and really show that Governor Herbert and the legislature believe in business and they prioritize it. Now, taking it one step further to this group. Today's the inaugural flight of this room, and this is our test room, so to speak. If we find that we utilize this technology in a significant way and that it will work really well, we'll probably expand this to our other conference rooms. But we have 2 cameras here. We have our friends from UEN supporting us. And by the way, Utah Education Network puts on 250 plus meetings like this a day. And they administer those and they oversee them and they make sure that they run well. It's what I like to call, and I think they call it this too, Utah's best kept secret. But the goal here is to drive collaboration and coordination. What we foresee in the future is that on a monthly basis we'll be doing training events with our various cities and counties. I try to get out in the state. Maybe I can make 2 or 3 rural road trips a year, but to do that is difficult, and I can get to 5 or 6 counties in a couple of days. But if we can train and coordinate with our sister agencies and our counties across the state and talk about things that are going on in broadband or on the incentives program or on the recruitment program or what we're doing to help small businesses, if we can do that on a regular basis, it's just going to drive things forward even better. And in a state where you have 2.8 million people, not very big, compared to the competition we have across the nation, these are things that we have to do in order to stay ahead of the rest of the country. As the economy comes back in the country, which I know and I believe it will, and as other states regain their ability to do business, we will have to be further down the road, and this is a key component of that. So we're grateful for the UEN network and the investment that has been made. We're grateful for their support in counseling and consultation, helping us develop this room in a way where with these 2 cameras now we can really be effective in what we're doing. And I mentioned SAIC, working to create a cyber ring around this state is one of the things we're working on right now. SAIC is here supporting the National Security Agency's big data center and some other businesses, and Dennis Likes is the gentleman doing that. This is the future. If you read in the Wall Street Journal in the last week, they did a full report on the health industry, and one of the key, 30-40% of what they were talking about was virtual health care, e-health, utilizing technology, utilizing broadband, and utilizing collaboration via what we're doing now in high def in order to improve things. So we're just grateful for Tara and Kelly and the team and your efforts in mapping out the state and then developing the plan that's going to take us to the next level. And I would just say on behalf of Governor Herbert, who would love to be here to talk to you and tell you the same thing, thank you for your efforts, because without you, none of this would be possible. And it really takes all of us working together. And anything that we can do to facilitate, I know that you have the 2 smart people right here beside me. I always like to say I'm the smartest guy in the room, and that's because I hired them. And other people that we have on our team here. And anyway, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And congratulations, and thank you for being, it's very apropos to have the broadband group and the advisory board kicking off and inaugurating this room. It literally has not been used until today, so thank you. In terms of all the technology.
Thank you, Spencer. So I will excuse Spencer whenever he needs to go. I know he has the opening of U-Star, right?
Yep. Oh, yes, I'll just mention, you talk about great things going on in the state. First of all, the headliner is this meeting, but the other thing is there's a little building up on the University of Utah campus, and it's they're doing they'll be doing studies on the brain, and we're talking about little neural receptors that they can insert in the brain to help facilitate things, and then they also have a nanofab there, and we've recruited well over 45 different top researchers from around the world to help do that, and today's the kickoff of that. So we'll now have the 2 buildings, one at Utah State University and one at the University of Utah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're all welcome to come to that ribbon cut, but I know you'll be doing important things too.
Thank you. So I know I saw a few new faces to the room, so I thought we'd do our normal introductions. If you just want to go around the room, say your name, say your organization. Tara Tui, and I'm with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, managing the broadband project.
And I'm Kelly Cole, and I'm also with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, the Utah Broadband Project.
I'm Jeff Egley with Technical Services at the Utah Education Network.
My name is Sharon Bertelson from Ballard Spawn.
Steve Proctor, the Utah Communications Agency Network. We do public safety radio.
Winston Wilkinson, Governor's Office of Economic Development. I do legislative relations.
Joseph Wabra of Enterprise Technologies, and I'm here on behalf of the Confederate Tribes of the Ghost Shoot Reservation.
Stan Stahl, Utah Rural Telecom Association.
Dennis Sampson with Utah Education Network.
Spencer Jenkins, Utah Automated Geographic Reference Center, the map folks.
Justin Stewart, the League of Cities and Towns.
And Donna Jones-Moore, State Librarian.
University of Utah.
Jim Stewart, UEN.
Jack Walkenhurst, All West Communications.
Dave Ryan, Strata Networks. Jared Anderson, Emory Telecom.
Rob Johansson, Emory Telecom.
James?
Hodges, Utah Education Network.
James is running everything today, so he's going to be busy. And Eric?
Eric Eisen with CenturyLink.
Audrey Zimmerman with Utopia.
Great. So again, everybody, welcome. I hope you enjoy our new space. I can take you on a quick tour at the very end of the meeting if you're interested as well. So let's just get started. I wanted to make a note on the agenda. Lynn actually emailed me just this morning, and she was on her way here and just said, I do not feel good. I'm going home. So we'll catch up with her agenda item at the next meeting. She's had some issues with the Forest Service and the Cottonwood Canyons, and she wanted to bring that to this group's attention and talk about some rights-of-way issues. So we'll just table that for now, but let's just turn the time over to Steve Proctor, who has an exciting announcement.
Well, I don't know how exciting it is, but I was appointed by the chairman of the FCC to sit on a national committee to develop technical standards for the broadband network for public safety. I don't know if many of you know about that or understand about it, but a couple of, actually February the 28th, the Congress passed the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2001-2. What that has to do with broadband, I'm not quite sure, but anyway, there was an attachment to the bill that included some significant pieces of spectrum for public safety and for the development of a public safety broadband network nationwide. So I just did a couple of slides, and we'll go through those real quickly and give you an idea of what this really means. This bill will establish a network or an organization called FirstNet, and FirstNet will be and have the responsibility for developing this nationwide network to serve public safety. It reallocates, as I said, a significant portion of spectrum for this wireless network. It established an interoperability board. That's the board I was assigned to develop these technical standards. We have to have these standards developed and to the commission by May 22nd, so that's not very far away. We have been working diligently over the last month, spending about 4 to 5 hours a day in conference calls and person-to-person meetings developing these standards. And then 30 days after we submit our report, they should have these, the FCC needs to approve these standards and forward them on as they stand up FirstNet. Next slide, please. FirstNet will be an independent authority. It's kind of like a quasi-government organization. It's under the NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications, whatever, NTIA. I can't remember.
Administration.
Thank you. It's exempt from the Paperwork Reduction Act, Administrative Procedures Rules, and regulatory flexibility. That means it has been given some pretty broad flexibility in developing this network and bringing the pieces together necessary to put it together. It has a 15-member board. It holds the single public safety license for 10 megahertz forward and back, so that's 20 megahertz of spectrum to provide services in a wireless environment to public safety.
Is that in all U.S. territories?
Yes. Yes. I'm not sure about like Puerto Rico or some of the ones that, and there may be some issues along the borders too because of different frequency allocation. But anyway, it's the continental and Alaska and Hawaii. This network is designed to deploy in phases with substantial rural coverage, and that is one of the issues we are really hitting in this technical advisory board, because as these things roll out, they tend to serve LA and New York and Orlando and Houston and big cities, but they forget the rural areas, and that's where the problems are just as big and difficult to solve in many areas of the country. The board includes the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Attorney General of the United States, and 15 other members that are picked based on their qualifications and abilities to serve on the board. 3 of these will have to be public safety professionals who have been involved in the development of public safety networks. urban and rural orientation. Each board member has to have some type of experience, whether it be technical, network, financial. This network is designed to be a cost recovery network, so it will be a network that people buy a service on, they get a user device, and they pay a fee to use the network. FirstNet must consult with regional, state, tribal, and local jurisdictions with all aspects of construction of the network, placement of towers, coverage areas, security, any kind of issues that involve a rural or local area has to be run through that area, because they want to make sure that they use resources that are there rather than develop new resources as they move forward. Yes?
Steve, I was just going to ask, has funding been allocated for the entire phase deployment, the construction, or will state and local governments be expected to come up with funding as well?
We'll get there in a second. Okay.
Thanks.
Each state needs to appoint either a board or an officer or somebody that will work cohesively with the FirstNet board as the network is developed. NTIA has been given, there's been $7 billion attached to this bill, and $2 billion of it is money that they can borrow against, but it has to be paid back once the network is developed. And NTIA is going to establish a grant program for states so that they can set up and do grants. They'll assist state, local, tribal, regional areas in development of the infrastructure. If we as a state have some significant pieces that we can contribute as part of the infrastructure, or we have, like local exchange carriers or whatever that can be involved in the development, it's the discussion will be that they use those resources first before. As I mentioned earlier, there'll be a single officer certified in every state that will be the coordinating factor. And after the technical requirements are turned in, after FirstNet does an RFP to determine how they're going to build the network, each state will have the option of either opting in to the nationwide program or opting out and building their own. I don't think we have enough information as a state to determine whether we're opting in or opting out yet. I think that's some issues down the road that we still need to talk about. The governor will be the person that decides whether we opt in or opt out after all those decisions are made. And when a state decides to opt out and build their own network, they have to go through a strict approval process with the FCC to make sure all these networks mesh together. One of the big concerns we have, and from a public safety standpoint especially, is when you get to the border of Utah and Idaho, for instance, the public safety problems don't stop at the border, nor do the frequencies, nor does the radio coverage. So you want to make sure as you cross those borders you have the ability to communicate one with another and make sure that the system works for who's ever involved.
Do they have incentives for the states to participate in the national network? Is this like the Interstate Highway Program where they pay a certain
We haven't got that far yet, but there is if the state builds their own network, there's a 20% match. So if that's a disincentive, there's the disincentive to the federal money. There's still, like I say, we've been into this thing 4 weeks now, and there's still a bunch of issues that have not even been put out on the table. But the opportunity we have is obviously to build a network that provides service to public safety. Some of the services we're talking about as we put these technical requirements together are real-time video, facial recognition, two-way. Actually, two-way radio is really pretty far down on the list. The architecture they've selected is called LTE, and that doesn't even have a two-way component to it as of yet. We are trying to be visionary in developing some ideas for future technology that will be enabled on the network, and like I said, I don't think there's a lot of things that have really been defined that the network will support going forward. I didn't know how many copies to bring. Here's just this last slide here. It shows you the timing, and I'll pass that around. It'll kind of give you an idea of the schedule that we're working on to get this thing kicked off. And one thing is we've been in discussions in this committee I'm on, we're amazed at how quickly they have put put this bill together and how they want to enact it fast. And some of us have complained a little bit that it's too fast, but the other side of that coin is it keeps the spike in your back to get you moving forward. So you figure by August of this year, you're going to have this FirstNet board stood up, and about 180 days after that, you're going to have an RFP and a network design out on the street. So that means conceivably next year you could start seeing some of this network roll out. So anyway, be happy to take any questions that you have. It's been a very interesting experience to get in the room with some of these people that design this stuff on a national level, and that's where we are.
Steve, I did have a question. The 20% match, is that a cash match from the state, or can that be in-kind services? I know it differs on some NTIA programs.
Yeah, I don't know that they've defined that yet. I would imagine, if you're going to bring, for instance, a tower in a building, I'm sure they can count that as a match. They have in the past when you bring something that's already constructed.
I have another question.
Sure.
This network, is this going to be something that you would envision that is laid along existing infrastructure paths, or is this going to be a new and diverse?
I think it's going to be a combination of both. There are obviously to build another, to be fair, Verizon or AT&T network across this country that serves just public safety, you couldn't afford it. You couldn't afford the user fees. You couldn't afford the cost of building it. So somewhere, these networks are going to have to mesh together, and you're going to have to build on top of each other using the same infrastructure, the same sites and towers. I mean, we were just talking about covering, for instance, downtown New York City with an LTE 10 megahertz device. The coverage pattern for that is about a block. Then you come out to Kanab, Utah. The coverage for that is about 10 miles. So you're building all these little segments that got to work in harmony with each other. So you can think of the number of sites that's going to take to build to cover the country. Just you couldn't afford to build all those over an existing cell system and existing cell sites. So it's going to be a cooperative effort, no question.
So is there anything that this group can do to help your efforts?
I think once the technical parameters are sent to the FCC and FirstNet is stood up, I think we need to probably get some representation there for sure. And once FirstNet decides, what the network architecture is going to be, then we as a state have the responsibility to determine whether we're going to be in or whether we're going to be out, and to answer all those questions that go along with that. And that's, 90 days away.
So I guess you'll just let us know what you need and when, and
we will.
We can convene as you need to,
okay.
Because I think this is really important. And it's something that will affect everybody in this room.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody that is anything in telecommunications will have an opportunity here. There's no question about it.
Well, thank you so much. And
well, we were all pretty surprised. We've been lobbying and working this thing for about the last 5 years. We were really surprised that it passed. There were, up to the last minute, there's no way this is going to happen. And bingo, it happened. So
maybe it'll create jobs. Maybe that's why it's in there.
Does NTIA staff this, the RFP and all the work?
The FirstNet board will be stood up. They will do the RFP. They'll get the staff hired. They'll do whatever they need to do using that $7 billion as seed money to get the thing started. The unique piece of it, though, really is that it's independent.
So I've asked Jeff Egley to come and talk about this video conferencing system. I know we've heard from UEN before, but I thought because this is the first live event that GoEd is doing, that it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about how UEN's IBC system works.
Sure. And Tara and I had an opportunity to speak down at the St. George meeting of the League of Cities and Towns last week, where I was invited along with Robert Wagner from Utah State and staff members from Senator Mike Lee's office, who are big advocates of trying to leverage some of these technologies to be able to connect more with cities, counties, and folks around the state where possible. And so when the league talked to me, what they really wanted to have a discussion on was twofold. One is what's UEN doing, but could we just talk about the technology itself? Many of you were up at the Echo Broadcast Center late in 2011 when we hosted this meeting, and we really, at that point, talked more specifically about what UEN does, and also referenced what took place with the governor's rural tour around the state and how that technology was leveraged. So I'll try not to be too redundant in some of that, but there have been a few changes since we last met and we discussed IVC. As you may know, UEN partners with service providers around the state to provide the service that we do. The bulk of our network we do not own, but we partner with on the development of that and the fiber and the support by working with the rural providers, working with the large providers along the Wasatch Front to make this happen, as well as with Utopia. So as we do this and we start talking about video conferencing services, this is the perfect group to have this discussion with, because oh, I did it again. Hold on one second. Did this at the last time. So let me get this back up. There we go. So this is the perfect group to get into a discussion like this, because the cities and towns are looking at this technology. They want to understand how can they use it, and the most important piece of information I can share with them, aside from what are some of the best practices with video conferencing, is the fact that you have to have a good foundation. You have to have a network. And as I've traveled the state, I work with our educational partners around the state. Sometimes I will come into contact with municipalities as we're doing work. And it's obvious that a lot of those communities, the towns and municipalities themselves, need to make some improvements first in terms of network bandwidth if they're going to start leveraging technologies like this. And with UEN and with education, we can't live without it. We can't do video conferencing technologies. We can't do disaster recovery. We can't do learning management. We can't do cloud-based services without having the network to support it. And so this map was probably brought up during that last visit. These are just core backbone segments that extend around the state that ensure that we've got the kind of robust connectivity around Utah to support the kind of services that public education and higher education require of us. And as I drill down into a county level, this is down in Utah County. It's very specific to public education. We also connect the applied technology campuses down there and libraries in that county. And so this is just one portion of the stakeholders that we serve within Utah County. But I think it's important to note you have to have the network to support these kind of applications. And then you can start leveraging video conferencing technologies to support that drive time, to get access to your state and federal representatives, and to start using that for meetings such as here we are today at GoEd. Spencer Eccles mentioned today, Tara as well, that they would love to be able to start leveraging this technology to meet with you more, to be able to increase that contact, and this is a technology that can help make it happen. I thought it was very important with the League of Cities and Towns is to differentiate what kind of conferencing we're talking about. There's standards-based and there's proprietary. And a lot of you may be familiar with a proprietary such as Skype or Google Plus or Apple FaceTime, things like that, which require you to have other participants using the same exact application. In most cases, it's free. Most of them have gone to high definition. In some cases, like Google Plus, you can even do bridging, so you can go to multiple sites. But when you start getting into government, education, and business, you need to start focusing on a standards-based solution so that you know that when you go to contact somebody, you can expect how you'll contact them, how you'll connect, some of those features that you can use. And so this system here is based on standards. And when we say that, we're talking about H323 and SIP. And that's how we build out our network. That's how we ensure that if we're connecting to somebody down in Kanab, which we do regularly, connecting to somebody in Washington, D.C., or connecting to somebody in Brussels, if they've got a standard-based solution, we can do some testing. James Hodges and his group are great about doing all the preliminary up front, especially if you're talking to somebody for the first time, working out those logistics so you understand what are the technologies we're using. Because when you go to use Skype or something, you've all agreed that that's the solution you're going to use, and you're mainly going to go desktop to desktop. You're not going to do a room environment like this. Some of you have seen Cisco telepresence. That's even another level of conferencing that you can do, but we found the current solutions that we work with are a lot more flexible, more approachable cost-wise, and have worked very well for what we do. I know Deb's presented on what UTN does based on the same kind of technologies. That way we can ensure we're having a consistent experience and we know what's going to happen. So just keep that in mind. A lot of times I'll talk to people and Skype's just become synonymous with video conferencing. They use that term all the time. I'll Skype you. But know that if you're wanting to talk with GoEd, you're wanting to get with a state agency, while we support primarily education, we also support state government, and they're going to be basing their systems all around these same standards. We talked to you in I believe it was December about some of the things we offer, which is in terms of higher education and public education, concurrent enrollment. But it's the ad hoc meetings that we're really seeing them grow. We worked a little in the medical, but we can't scratch the surface on what Deb does. It's just one-off situations where we've helped come into procedure rooms and help pull that operating room into an environment where doctors can have a conversation, but we don't do that day in and day out. But the ad hoc meeting side has really started to grow, and it's on the administrative side of districts, higher ed, as well as state government. And a great example for this group is a few years ago when the Snake Valley water hearings started. And so we don't traditionally work on that side of those kind of areas with our technology, but with the Snake Valley water, what occurred is you have a lot of folks out in Garrison, out in Trout Creek, in Callio, that have a stake in what's going on in those discussions. And the challenges for them to drive to Salt Lake every time there's a meeting to get into those and participate is difficult. And so the governor's office, Division of Natural Resources, the GUAB School District, the Tindick School District, UEN all came together to find a way so they could go to their closest schools and participate in those discussions. And it was important. There was a location here in Salt Lake with video that they could do that from. In most cases, that was up at the state office building. And UEN worked with the governor's office and with DNR to make sure those meetings were in place where we could then connect them up. And it's those kind of experiences that make it possible for the communities to really participate in these larger discussions. And it was interesting, after the presentation down at League of Cities and Towns, some of the side conversations, a lot of those were the same things that those communities really were desperate to find a way to connect in. It was focused on water. It was focused on local resources and local rights and things of that nature, or improving infrastructure. And the challenges some of those folks have to come to the Wasatch Front or connect with folks out of state are immense. They're generally wearing a lot of different hats. So this technology can definitely support that. I think the first step is getting that network connectivity out there to make sure that those communities can do it, and then providing them the best practices and information. So on the UEN side, we support education and state government. So as Tara and others want to schedule meetings, we can work with them, and then we're hopeful to see that perhaps this technology can be fully leveraged as some of the cities and counties start to look at ways to use the technology. And I know firsthand some of you on the corporate side and the service provider side already use this technology yourself. And so let's remember, if you really do want to participate and use your Polycom, your Tandberg Cisco endpoint, we can help coordinate that through Tara and our technical technical service support center for these kind of meetings and bridge it and make it possible. There's good desktop solutions as well as room systems. The one we use is Mobi. It's standards-based, and that's the solution we work with, and it's possible to join a meeting like this, call desktop to desktop, or to call a room system. And with that said, I just wanted to kind of cover where these current discussions have been, what folks are asking us, and kind of differentiate on those technologies so you understand the differences if you decide that it's something you want to leverage. And James, is there any, just before we close out, is there anything you want to add to this, just things for folks to keep in mind? Or?
I think you hit everything that you needed to. One thing that I always like to, as a support and operations manager, say is if it is a first time with a new participant over IBC, coordinate with us. We'll be happy to work out the technical details and coordinate with those folks on the other end to make sure that they have the capabilities and that we can make sure that you have a good, quality, transparent experience.
So. On that, all.
So I had a question. Have you got a lot of cities that are asking for this? I mean, what's the level of understanding that a lot of cities have when they see that UEN can do this, and especially from that meeting last week? Did you get requests like, can we get this in our
It was obvious that there's kind of a need to educate on what the technology is, what it takes. A lot of the questions were actually even how can we use this technology to connect with our legal contacts in Salt Lake, and so they may be working with a firm that they want to work with, and most firms are using this technology. So it's understanding first, do you have the network connectivity? And I can say that the mayor of Cornish, Utah, up in northern Utah, is it Cornish? I thought I knew all the communities, and I'd heard that, but I haven't been there. And the mayor approached me, and they're very bandwidth restricted right now. And so he explained to me some water discussions they'd been in where they actually used their smartphones and the speaker on their smartphones to hold most of these meetings because of some of the challenges they actually have within their community. And so I thought it was really important with that group to make sure we had a discussion on network first. In order to do what we do, you have to have the network to support these technologies. And I think there's still an educational process. I think it's important to reinforce on the UEN side, we're chartered to support education, higher ed, and public education, and we have an MOU now with the state of Utah to support the bridging and services for state government. And so we're really not in a position where we can do the day-to-day for, say, a county or a city, but if it's an event where GoEd, for example, is hosting an event, then we would be doing it on your behalf. And so with DNR and the governor's office and the legislature, that's generally how we get pulled into that process.
If I could just add to that quickly, Jeff, there's a lot of state agency offices, DWR, DNR, UDOT, that have standards-based rooms in their facilities, as well as in those communities. Our educational sites are always open to hosting outside groups as well. So you could have folks in Milford, Beaver, Cedar City, somewhere go to the university rooms or the high school rooms to participate.
And to add to that, and Jim can jump in on this as well. On the way back from a meeting we had in Cedar City yesterday, we had working with state libraries and with Iron County and the city of Enoch. We met with the city manager yesterday because we just turned up the library right next door adjacent to Enoch City, and they're ecstatic about having that bandwidth. They want to make sure they're fully leveraging that bandwidth for the citizens, and how will they use that as a library. And as we talked about some of the online services that they can utilize and training, we also talked about video, because Enoch itself has a T1 supporting everything they need to do for data, and right next door they have 10 meg, and there's a lot of stuff that they could do as a community if they want that to be the place to go to attend a meeting, say it's scheduled and bridged with other participants around the state. So we thought, at least plant that seed that might be another way as a community that they leverage their library and the resources that are theirs.
Is there a list someplace of how many rooms there are that are capable of this around the state?
We could.
Yeah, if you go to uen.org, we have a complete listing of all of our locations throughout the state. In fact, there's an interactive map Yeah, I'd be happy to. You bet. Perfect.
Way for us to get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Any other questions at all? Go ahead,
A
Eric.
little off topic, but maybe you or Jim could answer. As far as executive director for UEN, what's your time frame?
I'll defer to Jim.
Eric's doing a great job, and we have all the time in the world. Actually, I'll defer to Steve Corbino. He is on the search committee and can probably answer that more.
I guess you can only pass the hot potato 3 times. The search is active. It is posted on the University of Utah job system under UEN Executive Director. The time frame is as soon as possible. It did open up about 7 days ago, so realistically, I would assume that we've got to give 4 to 6 weeks for people to submit. Sometime this summer.
In the board meeting, there was discussion of it. It's either open for 45 or 60 days, and nobody was quite sure. So it will be sometime after that. We're hoping by July 1st.
Yeah, from a University of Utah perspective, we'd like to get our vice president-elect back.
And to add to that, I think it may have been mentioned, but since the legislative session, we've transitioned from a 25-member steering committee to a 11-member governing board, and so that's in place. They've met. I think they've had 2 or 3 meetings up to this point, and pushing forward. And I think they'll be meeting on a very regular schedule, at least once a month at this point.
Good question. So I was also attending the same meeting that Jeff was, the League of Cities and Towns in St. George, and to get ready for that meeting, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at what cities have websites and what cities don't, and sort of take a survey of what's going on. And really, we've been looking at ways that we can increase adoption through the Broadband project throughout the state. And the challenge that we're facing is that we have the highest adoption rate in the nation. 80% of homes using broadband, or reported using broadband at home. And so we started talking to providers, especially a few rural providers, and asking, are there pockets of non-adopters or non-subscribers within your service area that you could point out? And the answer we got from most people was no, that's not really possible. The non-adopters are kind of spread out. And from the research that we've been doing, we thought it's going to be very hard to target our very limited resources at this widespread non-adopting population. I mean, you all know our population is 90% based on the Wasatch Front and 10% based in basically 90% of our geography. So it's a very broad task to try to accomplish with limited resources. So we started looking at using the resources we have to focus on adoption. Well, maybe we shouldn't be looking at individuals and individual citizens or groups. Maybe we should be looking at a top-down approach. So in preparation for the League of Cities and Towns, I did a little bit of research on cities and businesses who have websites in the state. So here's what we know about Utah. We're the national leader in broadband adoption. We also have the youngest population in the United States, according to the latest, and I'm sure like 5 before census. I don't know what I'm saying. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Most of our schools are connected and serve as anchor institutions in rural areas. We have highly available residential broadband, which isn't the case in a lot of states with highly urban with a lot of rural population. So here's what we don't know so far. How are we leveraging all of these positive factors for economic development purposes? And I get that question a lot in this office. And how are businesses using broadband? Do they have a website? Do they have an online presence? And especially when we're talking about small or medium-sized businesses, I mean, we deal a lot with big business in this office in terms of incentives and recruiting, but we're trying to have more of a focus on expanding business, existing business in the state. So we don't know how they're using broadband, and we also don't know if cities, towns, or counties are realizing the broadband availability or the fact that we have a really young tech-savvy population. Are they leveraging those resources? So to gather the data for cities and towns, first of all, I went to the Association of Counties website, found that all counties, all 29 counties in Utah currently have a website. And from the League of Cities and Towns, I found some rather unexpected results based on the data that they have gathered. 32% of Utah cities or towns do not have a website. They're mostly small or rural towns, but still 32% have no website. And it's obvious that more and more people are expecting to communicate with their government online. And in the National Broadband Plan, there's this quote I really liked about how Americans expect the same level of service that they get from a retailer, from their bank, from their government, and they're often disappointed with what they find. So that's one component of what we looked at. And for the business component, this is a little hard to read, but I worked with the BEAR initiative. For those of you who don't know what the BEAR program is, the Business Expansion and Retention Program, it's been in existence since the 90s, but it was just funded through legislation that was signed by Governor Herbert this past session. And so they focus on economic gardening. They basically, businesses come to BEAR and are looking to fill a niche or a need or business service, and BEAR can provide them with resources. It's sort of a database function that they have that's a big compiler of information. So they have really close contact with a lot of businesses. And last year was really a big focus on just getting the basic information from a lot of businesses. So they did a very extensive survey where they contacted 5,000 businesses throughout the state, mostly in rural counties in 20 of 29 counties. The only counties they didn't do the survey in are Davis, Morgan, Rich, Salt Lake, Sanpete, Summit, Utah, and Weber. So we still are looking forward to doing research on those counties as well. But with that caveat, this is what we found, that 72% of businesses surveyed do not have a website. I was shocked by that. When you look at almost the exact inverse of residents using broadband, you would expect that that statistic would be inverted. So there were about 5,000 businesses surveyed, and only 1,300 had a website. And, I get the question a lot, as I started talking to people about this statistic, does this surprise you? And a lot of, contacts in the small business world say no. Why would a gas station, need a website? Well, if you have somebody driving on the road and they're looking for a place to buy gas in the city, if you don't have some sort of an online presence, right, you're probably not going to get found, and they'll keep driving to the next town. But, that's just one instance. But, brick and mortar businesses traditionally, I think, have avoided being online because they haven't found the need. But I think that paradigm is definitely shifting. So these are results by county. The county, so you can't really see this. Daggett County is the farthest to the left. There were only 5 businesses surveyed in Daggett County, the smallest county in Utah, and they all had websites. So pin a star on Daggett County. Overall, the total shows us that, I mentioned this before, only 1,300 businesses had websites. The lowest adopting county by far was Beaver County. Very low percentage, only 8 businesses in Beaver County had a website. So I present this data to you without much of a solution, other than to say I think this is a niche that we could fill, and that our project is looking for ways that we can use our funding to have more local interaction with businesses and cities to increase online adoption. And just because they don't have a website, I understand that doesn't mean that they don't use the internet. I guarantee they use the internet. But if they're not being found, I think that that's something we're missing out on that we could improve on. Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see the histogram here as a function of size, whether it's number of employees or annual revenues. Might be a large hog farm that does $5-10 million a year doesn't really fight, but I imagine you've got single proprietorships or small companies too, so might be one way of getting after this.
I know, I don't know if it's good, talking with Glenn Philby a lot. Is a relation to how big they are, and the problem that they have is, and where Dylan's trying to help them is, a lot of those little small businesses only want to pay about pricing them out of the market for the type of website. A lot of those are either they don't. There are some people that just that really doesn't need to advertise his cows online because he's selling them some other way. But there are a lot of those small businesses in those helping them to avenue to actually have that website and then maintain it. The company gets outdated, ongoing fees, and that's what we were finding when we were working with Dylan and problem. But sounds like when you and Kelly started nodding your head, that's a project that we're working on down in Carbon.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when we approach, so what we really want to do at the end of the day is we want to be able to provide some sort of events or training throughout the entire state where a business can just come to this event for half a day and they leave with a website. We're not talking about ongoing maintenance fees for hosting or anything like that, but just the initial, get your business online. And this the idea came from the Google Get Your Business Online seminar. I don't know how many of you all attended that or were aware of it, but they hosted 2 events in Utah. They're doing this around the nation. The first one, they had about 1,000 attendees, and this was in Salt Lake. And it was very popular. A lot of small businesses came. A lot of businesses with websites came and wanted to learn how they could improve their website or use analytics better or commerce better. But the idea of them leaving with a website I thought was so powerful. And then they had a second event, and they didn't expect much. They didn't do much advertising, and they still had 400 participants. And so when I went to that event, I asked, are you going to be replicating this in rural parts of the state where we could really use this help? And they just said, we don't have the resources to do it. I thought we do. So the issue that we're having right now is trying to get this approved through our grant office because it isn't something, we are not supposed to have hands-on training component to the way we leverage our grants, but we're trying to find ways around that by utilizing local, maybe technology planning teams and putting it down to a local level and say, this is something we think is important for your community and let people run with it. But we're still working out the details, but I wanted to present you with this information, this group, and see if you had any thoughts or ideas or partners that we should be reaching out to try to accomplish this. Yeah, Donna.
Sure, I have one. I want to mention that with regard to rural libraries, we did a website in the box training. We had a number of libraries in the state that did not have websites, and we added to the certification standards that every library to be certified would have a website. So we did just a one-day training, website in the box, and you could borrow some things from that and talk to Colleen Egan about how that worked. It worked well. The caveat that didn't work so well was Some of the people that were the most technologically challenged, keeping those websites up, challenge. Still a challenge, which was mentioned before. That continues to be a challenge, but at least we got them started. But there are ongoing challenges to see that they actually maintain them.
Part of whether
maybe some examples of successful.
Partnering with PayPal.
on your adoption studies and on the website studies, look at as a function of adopters and website users. I mean, candidly, you got an old dog, new tricks problem here as much as any. I have parents and in-laws that are older that will not get a computer, who will not get on the internet, regardless of what you do.
Yeah, we don't have real dialed down statistics about age in Utah. We have national statistics about age, of course. But I think that's probably our biggest non-adopting population.
And they're also the fastest growing population of people getting online. I think that that's starting to happen to a degree, the older group.
Thought that comes immediate. Oh, there's a lot of
I said we baby boomers are taking over now.
Yeah.
Tara, one other thought, and I'm not trying to be politically incorrect here.
Please.
But on your first slide, one of the advantages that Utah has for broadband deployment is our degree of urbanization. And I'm not knocking rural Utah, I love it. But in fact, it's easier to deploy because so much of our population lives in such a constrained area. And that's a factor for us. A little bit like, maybe parts of us are more like Tokyo than Canada.
So I guess that if you have thoughts or comments about how we can approach this, please, let me or Kelly know, and we'll keep the group updated if we're able to move down the road using our grant to do this training. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on, and Kelly has a report that she wants to pass around.
And I give it to Jesse over there, so you could even maybe just pass it down the table, I think, and get Roger and Eric in the back there, so that everybody. We were a little bit more dispersed at the beginning, so. Okay, well, so for our grant, part of this group obviously is a product of our federal grant project, Utah Broadband project, and that's what's helped us to come and convene here and get everybody involved with the project. And as part of our grant milestones, one of the things that we put into our official project plan is to draft a report of the recommendations that have come out of this council. And we realize, of course, that being a voluntary group and not a statutory group, that this report that I've put together and that Tara's put together as well is a summary of the discussions that we've had in this group. And so this report satisfies one of the milestones on our grant as we have it written currently. So I just want to go through and just talk a little bit about how it was compiled, first of all. So what I've done is I've looked through the discussions that we've had as a group. This is focused specifically on things that we've discussed in our meetings. I know that we speak with many of you about many topics, not in this room, but this particular report is focused on the discussions that we've had here. And so I've gone through and I've looked at what the main subjects that we've discussed throughout our meetings, and I've tried to kind of get to the ones that have come up quite a bit and that have been the main focus of our discussions. And then I've gone through and broken those into specific subject areas. So you can see that we have education, libraries, economic development, public safety, healthcare, transportation, and rural broadband access. And so for each subject, I've gone through and looked at the different presentations that we've had that could relate to that topic. And I've come up with the first part on each subject. We'll have a discussion of what's been discussed, and a lot of times that's included background on that subject area that's come in through our presentations that we've had. And then I've also included a recommendations section with each subject, just trying to kind of narrowly focus on potential recommendations that this group could put forward. And so if you want to go through, one of the things that we really like is for everybody to review the document, and specifically I think that we have some subject matter experts on some of these topics, and so you probably know who you are, so we would like you to specifically focus on your area, and if there is additional, for example, background information into the topic that you think needs to be included, or additional recommendations, we would love to have that feedback, and really we'd like you to kind of own this report and really contribute anything that you think that would be valuable for the state to know with regards to these issues. And also, just to let you know, in the future, this doesn't mean that we won't bring up other subjects in the future that could be included in future reports, but we've limited it to the last year's discussion in this room, and we're trying to get a really good snapshot of what we've been focusing on in our discussions. Also, as you can see on the third page, we'd like to add a list of contributors to the report, and I think that this is probably the best way to kind of include you as contributing and participating. And so some of you might give actual feedback into your subject area, but also if you've been participating in the meetings and you review the document and would like to be listed as a contributor to the report, it'll be on an opt-in basis. And so if you would like to be included on the list of contributors, then please just send me your information, your name, your organization, and what you would like your official title to be on the report, and we'll include you that way. And we've also included, at the beginning, we've included, a disclaimer stating that this is part of our grant recommendations. And also, this document and the recommendations that are in here will give us a really good foundation for putting together a broadband plan for the state, which is also one of the milestones for our grant. And so that report will take this information and also add in a lot of the research that we've done as a project, and we'll be able to give a really good view of the state of broadband in the state. And so we look forward to hearing your feedback. Also, on the back page, we'd like to include any action items that you'd like us to discuss in the next year or two. We'd like to kind of come up with another action list of going forward things that we might want to also start working on as a group. Does anybody have any questions? I didn't. I think if we could get it back in within the next 2 weeks.
We'd like to have this finalized at our May meeting so that we can make it public after our May meeting, and we'll do a press release and everything.
And also, if there, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, for ease of editing, or those who may want to contribute, could you send an electronic version around?
Sure.
Yeah. And if you would like to make edits to this, if you could just redline your edits, I think that would make it easier on us to be able to track edits, just as a housekeeping note.
Yeah, that would be greatly appreciated. And also, if there are people, that we need to include that maybe aren't here, I think we should reach out to them, our regular attendees that might want to also take a look and review the document. And so I hope that as you read it, that it'll match, what you feel that we've been focusing on, and our general view of some of the recommendations that should go forward. And I think this is kind of exciting to to be able to kind of just put it on paper and have everybody look at it and get a feel for some of the things that we've been able to discuss. I think we've had some really good discussions in this room, and I think that this report will highlight a lot of those things.
So maybe we could make the due date May 11th. That's about a week before our next meeting. So let's just say May 11th will be the final call for contributors and edits
And reviews. Okay, I think that's it.
Great.
Okay.
So our next discussion item, we wanted to talk a little bit about wireless broadband availability for bookmobiles. And how this sort of came about is we have sort of started contacting some what we would consider community anchor institutions, and libraries being one of those. Donna said, you know, we have an issue with getting wireless connectivity at some of our bookmobiles because not like when I was growing up, there was no laptop on a bookmobile, that's for sure. But you know, these bookmobiles are becoming more high-tech, and people are going there expecting to be able to use the internet in some places. So we thought it would be interesting to take a look at a survey that Donna conducted with her bookmobiles, every stop in Utah, and they reported whether they do have wireless service or they don't, or it's intermittent. And we'd like to start doing this sort of a mapping project every month. So AGRC will now be doing sort of a monthly map, and we'll be asking different groups here for data. So if this is something that you think would be interesting as applied to your specific area of expertise, let us know, and we'll work with you to gather the data and to figure out a unique way that we can map it or overlay it with any sort of other data that you might want. Like we did broadband availability data, we could add in demographics or other sorts of things. Just use your imagination. But to get back to bookmobiles, the map that is being passed out, AGRC put together, and Christy Heaton from AGRC is our mapping wizard that put this together. So I want to have her just say a few words about how this came about.
How the map?
Yeah, just what it is. And
yeah, it's just I received a table with the bookmobile locations and whether they had internet or not, and then we words, put them on the map. Green means they are connected to the internet. Yellow means broadband. And then in the background we've got all of our wireless on the back, so you can kind of see like
dead zone, maybe.
Dead zone, or yeah. So we've just got all our providers listed.
So the table that Christy also put together that is being passed around is pretty interesting, I thought. So what AGRC did on the table is they took the address associated with the stop and assigned it a point, and then looked at our provider reported data, which is in green, and then our wireless drive testing data, which is in blue. And so each stop has associated attributes that way. So you can see that most stops that reported that they don't have any access or they have intermittent access, the provider reports that they do have access or that they should. And then you can go to the blue area and see that what the actual download or upload speeds are from an actual drive test. So in some cases where the provider is reporting, you know, let's just use this first one, the Alton Post Office as an example. AT&T is reporting that they serve this point with 1.5 to 3 megabits per second downstream, and ExpressWeb, who isn't mobile, but they do provide wireless service in that area. What we actually found, and this is for mobile, we found that no provider actually serves that spot. So the bookmobile was right. They can't get access there. So I thought I asked Donna to just tell us a little bit about what Bookmobile does and why it's important for them to have internet access, and then maybe we can talk about how we could work on this.
It was interesting to ask each of the bookmobiles to do a geolocation of each of their stops. We stop in 230 different communities. We do about 150,000 miles a year. We go to schools, we go to nursing homes, we go to parking lots of something. Sometimes there's not too much around except a place to park, but there are people that live in these areas. And this is obviously that 10% of the population that is dispersed a lot over our state. So some of these stops are very remote. Some of them are places you probably, even UEN may not know the names of some of these stops because they're not a real place. They're just a stop, a couple of corners of where roads come together. But the bookmobile gave you a tiny little replica, and you see on the wall a picture of the bookmobile. The bookmobiles do travel all over the state. This is the website that we maintain on the bookmobiles. You can click on each county and click on one of the counties, it doesn't matter which one, and you'll come up with some detail. And here, and yes, we even brought a toy. You can click on the county, it talks about that particular county. You can find the schedule on these websites, so that if you know someone who lives in one of these rural areas, they can. Let's go ahead and see if you can find the schedule on there, Tara. Over there to the left. Only right, let's see, yeah, left. There, schedule, okay. And then click on the schedule there. Yeah, complete schedule. These change because obviously we have a winter schedule when school's on. We have a schedule in the summer when school is not on, because a number of the rural schools in Utah, library service in those schools is lacking, needs supplements. So the bookmobile really is what brings people new things to read. Tara was a bookmobile user, so she's a former advocate. Now she lives in a metro area.
But guess what? My stop's not on there anymore. North Logan didn't make the list.
Well, look, there's Cornish.
There's Cornish.
It's meant to be stopping in places where there aren't fixed site libraries or in places that don't have easy access. That's why I mentioned nursing homes. I mentioned schools that don't have an adequate collection to serve their clientele. So the testing of this was really interesting because some of the places where it says there's connectivity, we tried with wireless cards from different providers, and sometimes when you got the results of how we connected. It's helping us to know that in some other places we need to try some other kinds of access. We've bought new cards to try in some of the locations, and we're open to any other suggestions, but it really is helping us to know what happened with the studies around the state, and then with us taking it out and trying it for a practical application. And on these bookmobiles, I mean, we have iPads people can use, we have Wi-Fi, they can bring their own computer if their internet access doesn't work at home. It can work when the bookmobile's there. It's not too often, it's not every day, but at least it's sometimes. Most of the places it's every other week, but you can look at schedules, and it varies as to where the place is. If you're going out on the Go Shoot reservation, we only go there once in a while because you have to go out of state to get there. So there aren't, some of these places, there aren't direct places to get there. If you look at the map, one of the reasons there are some counties where you don't see any stops is that Bookmobile is a cooperative project between the state and county government in the counties that have service. Some counties have decided that they're going to establish more fixed site libraries, small fixed site libraries, obviously, in these really sparsely populated counties, and not do bookmobile service. That's entirely a county decision. It was an economic decision in some of these counties that they no longer have the service because they just decided it wasn't something they could afford to continue to do. But we do continue to provide service in 14 counties, which we continue to evaluate and look at this service and look at ways to make it more modern. It gives people access to e-books, e-audio, all kinds of new kinds of things, as well as, and they couldn't get this without the broadband access. So that's laptop fits in with here. And if you have suggestions on any of these that you may have good ideas on how we can connect that we're not connecting on, send me an email. Just dmorris@utah.gov. I'd love to have your suggestions. And our goal is to provide internet at each stop that it's possible. And as Tara mentioned, at least there may be some that it isn't possible. But I think it will be at some point, everywhere. And it was very good for us to do when we first got this request that people said, you want us to do what? Because they all had to get the geolocations of each stop they were doing and then do the testing. But they did it, and they did it well.
Yeah, it was very easy to work with the data. I think it was really just clear cut, yes, no, or intermittent. And it's something we'd like to do for more anchor institutions or mobile institutions around the state. So Donna, I had another question. How do patrons typically use the internet at these stops? I mean,
and just like a patron does in any
and do
public
people
library.
expect it?
Sure. I mean, many people do now. I mean, people come to just like they go to any public library. Lots of times it may be senior citizens who don't have their own computer and don't plan to pay for internet access because why would I? I don't use it. That's the mentality. So they may come to the bookmobile and use something on the bookmobile. They can use either a laptop or they can use an iPad. And they can look at email from a grandchild or whatever they want to do. Or a business that's really struggling and doesn't have any internet connectivity of their own can use it. It's just like any public library usage. And they're there if somebody travels and they don't have internet access connected to their computer, but most of us do now. But there's lots of people who don't. They'll come to use that. So those are examples. Yes.
Down in our area, in all the parks and the libraries and whatnot, we've just gone up and put Wi-Fi hotspots in a lot of these. I know it looks like you're focusing more on the cellular, but some of these could probably hang around off UEN, put a router outside the school and put up a Wi-Fi spot. I mean, I don't know what the goal is there. I mean, that's what you'll get people sitting down all the time there, like in front of our libraries or our parks. They're always using that, but.
Well, it's a good question. We have to kind of handle a couple. The public education is required as part of SIPA to filter. Libraries are as well. And so I kind of had that same thought, not always necessarily a school, but strategically looking at where in those areas do we know we can get access, and then try to define solutions based on, can we wire in directly or via a hotspot you have, what would be required, and then what are the kind of the issues that we would have to do to make sure we're complying just within our role on services and how we provide it. But
based on what I see happening with UEN right now, that's a new service that we would provide if we were to do that. It would have to go through our board, but it's something that the local library or facility could provide themselves. That's what our library does right now. Our library has a hotspot out front, and a lot of the rock climbers come there and they sit there. But the other thought is, you might have a Wi-Fi hotspot that's put up by a lot of the providers around the state. We just put them up in the city parks and whatnot. Maybe move the bookmobile down the road two blocks and allow our Wi-Fi.
And see, those are things we need to know if that is an option.
Because we have Wi-Fi in almost all the parks. It'd be interesting to talk and see if there's a project or something there that we could collaborate with you on, and using UEN bandwidth, so you're not doing. Well, even on ours, we put it up in the city parks just to service, and that's a great thing. So that's just in our area. I don't know, but you might want to work with the providers on that, because we might, instead of the cellular, some of the wireline providers, we have Wi-Fi hotspots around the towns, and we'd be willing to put up.
So can you tell online where your hotspots are? Could we look?
City parks and Carbon Memory have Wi-Fi. Almost all of them. If they don't, call me.
Donna, maybe what we could do is do a little bit more analysis and suggest wireline providers to talk to for each of the stops on the Excel sheet.
That would really help us tremendously if that can go that deep, because that makes a difference. I mean, we're actually using the broadband and making it accessible to anybody in that area.
Christy, is that something that we can do? Just add in the wireline provider
That would be fantastic, thank you.
Great.
And there are more and more libraries working, as you just said, with parks and trying to be hotspots so that their internet is available anytime. But you have to realize it's filtered, but filtered isn't going to make that much difference. I mean, it's just going to block things that most people don't want to go to anyway.
Don't have to have an open hotspot either. I mean, if UEM wanted to have a bookmobile hotspot that only the bookmobile equipment can get. It doesn't have to be an open hotspot. I'm not saying that. I'm saying hotspot, and it might be a lot cheaper than buying.
And the price, if there are ways of doing this without spending so much, obviously the state's very interested in it.
Well, the nice thing about Wi-Fi is that then you could use that at any Wi-Fi location without having to have specific equipment for each different technology that you were going to use.
Well, this has evolved. We used to have great big satellites when we started out trying to have internet access in the rural areas. I have to tell you, we had these things that were mounted in different places on each of the bookmobiles, and we've evolved a lot from where we started.
It's amazing to me how we all want coverage in the same places.
And that's important. That's why we're all around this table.
I mean, I would venture to say half the states in the nation don't have this information available.
I would bet they do not, and we wouldn't have this analysis if it wasn't that we had this group coming together and pulling this kind of thing together. It makes all the difference in the world, and I feel really lucky to be part of this.
Let me just make one observation. Jeff and I were recently on a trip driving from Blanding to Hanksville to Loa. There's no doubt why there's no coverage in this.
No people.
But you know, the other side of that coin is that's where you have the most critical need when you need a rescue.
That's
No, absolutely.
true. That's true.
Well, in a place like Hanksville and Big Water are places where kind of the idea Brock brought up is how can we work when we know there's resources there? How do we leverage that? And because we certainly have a presence in both of those communities and pulling in the school districts and figuring out how do you make that work and get Wayne and Kane school districts involved in the discussion.
Well, the idea of working with the providers in those areas and providing some building those, wonderful idea. I think we should.
Just being around this table, being able to say that libraries have been designated, if there is an emergency, as places where people can go, and seeing that we'll be part of this new network that you're building is phenomenal. Right. Because it makes it possible for at least people to know that if there's an emergency, an earthquake, or whatever happens, there are already places that most everybody in the community knows where their public library is, and that's going to be an emergency place. And it's going to be part of your network. Makes a lot of difference. So thank you, Tara. We were very glad to do it and kind of excited about it. We decided all of you should have a website and a little bit of information. I hope you have friends who live rurally, and you can encourage them to use a bookmobile if they haven't. We have people who come in and take out laundry baskets of books. You know, if they have a number of children, we have people who don't drive anymore who come to a bookmobile, and that's their you know, the aging population. That's their library, and it makes a difference of life. It's a quality of life issue. If you look at this as a cost issue, you can't look at it as cost. You have to look at it as quality of life. And I think libraries have several things that are looked at as quality of life. Our blind services and our disabled services have to be looked at as quality of life as well. And as does Bookmobile.
My family has used all of those services. I'll just tell you, at one point in our life, we've all used all of the services.
Well, and those are things that make a difference in Utah. I think we care about people. So that's, again, one of our strengths.
So I guess we've ended early. Are there any other additional comments that anybody would like to bring to the group today? Our next meeting will be in this room again. It will be a lunch meeting, May 17th at 12 p.m. 12 p.m. Okay. See you all next time.
Thank you. And if you want to do a tour?
Oh, let's do that right now.
If you want to do a tour, some of us would like to do that.
Yes. Anybody who would like
They still in business?
Libraries, we can post it on our website.
I got my
The library director at the
$70,000 check.
Yeah, last Friday. On the side.
That was a
I
long.
had it to control.
3 years going on 10.
Yeah, that would be, we can get that. That's not
Yeah,
gonna
they're
be
still
a
working it. We don't do that.
I'm sure they are.
Well, and I had,
I think they'll tell you.
Yeah, it's good to meet you as well.
sometimes you gotta, reload it. You got on it.
Spencer?
So now everybody's seeing the video. There's more.
Thank you, Jim.
I'll send you an email.